Good morning, East Bay. What is happening in Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano counties? Learn about what's happening in our communities, an in-depth conversation so you know what's going on. We're talking to government, economic, political, nonprofit, and business leaders here in the greater East Bay. I'm Jared Ash, the host of the Capstone Conversation. Hey, welcome to this episode of the Capstone Conversation. I'm your host, Jared Ash. Today, we'll be diving into Contra Costa County and their general plan, which they are in the process of updating and looking for feedback today. So I'm joined by two guests from the county staff department who are immersed in every detail of this. And we're going to start by having them introduce themselves and then explain what is a general plan. Maureen, would you like to introduce yourself
Yeah,
first?
thank you, Jared. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Maureen Toms. I am the Deputy Director of the Department of Conservation Development's Policy Planning Division. And then I'll kick it over to Will.
Thanks, Maureen, and thank you, Jared. My name is Will Nelson. I'm a principal planner with the county. I manage the county's advanced planning section and am the project manager for Envision Contra Costa.
Right. So I'll ask that first question. People know, like, they get the concept of the general plan, but define it. What is the general plan and how is it used to guide county planning going forward?
Well, every city and county in California is required to have a general plan, and they're typically adopted on a 15 or 20-year basis. That's the planning horizon. And really, it's your blueprint for development. Sometimes they're referred to as the constitution for local land use planning. And so all of your planning decisions, your zoning, subdivisions, use permits, your zoning code itself, they all have to be consistent with your general plan, and it includes a variety of topics required by the state, things that people would normally associate with planning, like land use, transportation, housing, open space, things of that nature.
It's supposed to be updated every 15 to 20 years. When was it last updated here in Contra Costa County?
Well, there's no actual state requirement for when it's updated. You have to update one element, the housing element, on a schedule every 8 years. And then there are other elements that have to be updated at certain times, like they've tied them to the housing element, and that's more recent. But the county's general plan just celebrated its 33rd birthday in January.
So 33 years ago, that puts it at
1991.
1991. So before we all had email addresses, to put it in concept, well before the iPhone, well before we were all going to regular websites and things like that. So land use is not something that changes overnight, but just put that in perspective, like, wow, it was before everybody had an email address, right?
Yes, that's right, Jared. There have been amendments since 1991, just not a wholesale update of the general plan.
What are some of the components that go into the general plan? Will.
There's several mandated elements, as I mentioned a second ago. So land use, transportation, housing, open space, et cetera. And you can also add elements, your community can add elements that pertain to planning. So in Contra Costa County, we have a growth management ordinance, and that is linked to the half-cent sales tax we all pay that goes to CCTA. And then we also have a public facilities and services element. But you can organize these any way you want. You don't have to call them those names. So we've done a little rearranging and reorganizing of our plan this time around. But so those are the basic kind of topic areas. And then the board of supervisors, when they directed us to update the plan, also instructed us to weave 4 themes through it. And those are environmental justice, economic development, sustainability, and community health. And of those 4, one of them, environmental justice, is a state requirement.
Right. And let's talk. The county plan is is not impactful throughout, right? Because there's the city divide and the counties. This works in unincorporated counties. So what are some of the communities that would really be the most affected by this?
Sure. We have some very large unincorporated communities. In West Contra Costa County, we have North Richmond, East Richmond Heights, Rodeo, Crockett. There's a community known as Montera Bay, which includes Montalvin Manor, Terra Hills, and Bayview. And then west of Pittsburgh is Bay Point. That's by far our largest unincorporated community. Discovery Bay is also unincorporated, as is Bethel Island and a lot of the ag areas in East County. And then Alamo and Diablo are also unincorporated. The Pleasant Hill BART station area that we refer to as Contra Costa Center is also unincorporated.
Yeah, I think most people don't even realize where it ends and begins. And I know in Walnut Creek, there's lots of even a couple of donuts where you could be driving down the street, go from the city to the county, and then go back to the city again. Can we talk about that for a second?
Sure.
There's a history to that, right, Maureen? Why do those unincorporated areas exist, like parts of Saranap and Lafayette, Alamo, you mentioned Crockett?
Sure. Historically, an area, a city has a sphere of influence so that when, a property owner, when they want to develop it, they might also apply to annex into a city. LAFCO, which is the local agency formation, which oversees all of the special districts and incorporation. They're the ones that decide on whether or not something's going to be annexed. And sometimes it's sort of cherry picked as far as, they're only going to take a piece of the unincorporated area and annex that into a city, and one's going to be left behind. A lot of times that happens. And then also whenever there's an incorporation that's going to happen is that there's a review of the tax income that is generated out of that area. So a city may not want to incorporate an area unless they can provide those services in line with the tax revenue that they're going to receive.
I think that's helpful to frame it. Well, let's talk about a couple of those key areas you mentioned were priorities for the board of supervisors. Um, Health and health equity comes up a lot, particularly in some of those unincorporated areas. What are you what is the focus there? How does the general plan start talking about that?
The built environment affects this is something that I think a lot of people don't really think about, but the built environment itself has a tremendous impact on our health. And I don't just mean what's coming out of a smokestack or something like that, but just the way we get around, if you have access to parks or not, what businesses actually exist in your community. So, in the unincorporated area, we have, for example, several communities that are food deserts, as we call them. There's no grocery store. And the only place to get something to eat really in that community might be kind of a liquor store or a market that's selling, who knows what's on the shelf. But, just getting food is difficult. Even in places like Discovery Bay, for a long time, they didn't have a grocery store and people there had to drive, all the way to Brentwood, and it was around, 12-mile round trip just to buy groceries. So one thing that we want to do is make it easier through our land use regulations to be able to bring those sorts of businesses to areas that need them, cut the red tape when it comes to bringing in a market or grocery store, that kind of that kind of business that a community really needs. We're looking at our park system and our trails, and we're not in control of all of this. The trails, a lot of them are built by the East Bay Regional Park District, for example. But so working with our partners, such as and the cities too that provide parks, going back to the annexed, incorporated versus unincorporated, people cross lines all the time to go to a specific park or recreation facility. So we're going to be looking at more partnerships, trying to provide recreational facilities to people who normally don't have access to them. And then there's the medical facilities. Obviously, the way our medical system works is that government doesn't provide all of it or even most of it. And so if you look at, for example, a map of the county and the medical facilities, you see a high concentration kind of down the 680 corridor, not that many in East Contra Costa, and really not that many in West Contra Costa. So, some of these things go beyond the general plan. Again, partnering with private sector or other agencies. But as far as we can help with the land use, it would be things like, again, cutting the red tape. So it might be easier to open a dental office or an urgent care facility or something like that in areas that need them.
I want to hit that point of cutting red tape because it comes up in every economic development discussion. There's a lot to be said. Fremont and Vacaville are promising bigger companies 90-day fast track approval permits for bringing their facilities there. When you talk about cutting red tape, um, what do you envision? What is the permit process like? How are you streamlining it as part of this county general plan?
Well, so the general plan was adopted in the early 90s. The zoning code was adopted in 1947 and has also never really had a comprehensive overhaul. And it's very interesting to look at our zoning. I kind of kid around with people. I say, if you want to know what Contra Costa County looked like in the 40s, read our zoning code because you can do things by right, such as have a refinery or an explosives plant, because that's what was here. A single family zone allows for single family homes and also crops and farming because you were transitioning at that time from farms to subdivisions. You needed to allow both. So part of cutting the red tape is actually looking to what is here and what we anticipate will be here in terms of businesses, in terms of industries. And we have this kind of mantra with this overhaul of all these documents, and it's that the good things should be easy and the bad things should be difficult. And so polluting a community should be hard, if not impossible. Bringing in a beneficial land use should be very easy. And so, that if maybe our zoning being so outdated, it might require a use permit to bring in something like a grocery store, whereas maybe that should just be some sort of review of the architecture and the site layout and the landscaping, and you get to come in. So, that's the kind of thing that, that's a way that you can cut the red tape. And then, industry itself and job generating land uses, it's a big difference between what industries were back then and what they are today. And, I always think of up near Sacramento, there's a Siemens plant where they build, like light rail vehicles and commuter trains, and it's really close to a single family neighborhood, like across the street. And, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Now, maybe a toxic or hazardous waste facility right across the street, there's a problem with that. But if someone wants to come in with a facility that has good paying jobs, that's environmentally conscious and can coexist well with its neighbors, then they should have an easier permitting process.
You're talking about flexible zoning, right? So looking at areas that doesn't matter if it's office or medical, but hazardous waste, that's a different story, right? Or creating a hotel or a supermarket versus what could just be office, right?
Yeah. And Maureen, please jump in
So
whenever you.
you got
We're,
something to
we're
add
also
to
looking, to have balance, a jobs housing balance in the area, similar to the way things used to be, where you could walk to the grocery store, or you used to be able to just walk downstairs. If you were in a mixed use downtown area, so that's important. We'd like to make those kinds of uses easier, make it easier for other businesses to expand. As you know, I'm sure you're aware that, one of the big issues with somebody investing money is the time it takes to get those approvals. There's no return on that time that's invested there. And so we are working to align our zoning with the new general plan to really allow those kinds of uses that we want to see, to promote them in our communities.
it. Don't make it too easy, though. I have clients that hire me to walk them through the process. We Yeah, and from an economic development side, having flexibility, it is important because I do have clients that I bring into some city, and it just depends on how they read it. And there was one example where it was like, well, here's a soil and water testing company? Do you view it as an R&D service? Because that would require a CUP. Or do you view it as a research service? If you view it as a research service, oh, it meets the broader zoning requirements. It's good to go. So cities in the county that can have flexibility behind it and let staff make a decision based on the intended goals, I think is important. So I think going the route you're going does sound important for that long-term growth.
Yeah, that's the intent of the update of the general plan and then the future update of the zoning code.
Yeah. How do you account for growth? Certainly in the 1940s when the suburbs were starting, wow, this looked very different. Even the vision for what Contra Costa could be is very different. The next
Well,
20, 40 years, how do you look ahead to where this county is? It's likely going to grow. How do you attract businesses? How do you attract more residents? How do you set all of this up in your thinking?
well, first of all, we're gonna take a look at what the trends are for the Bay Area. That's gonna be number one. And a lot of that has been driven by what we need to plan for in our housing element that was just recently adopted. We've had to plan for over 7,800 units in unincorporated Contra Costa County. And that's the larger than any of the incorporated cities. So we've had to take a look at the different communities and, they're going to be mainly transportation. That's going to be the biggest issue as far as where growth is going to happen. Is it on a rail line, a BART rail line? Is it on, within the I-80 corridor, the 680 corridor, or State Route 4? Is there transportation? Is there existing resources? And then of course, where are the jobs? The commuting from East County, because that grew so quickly in the 80s and 90s, it really jammed up Highway 4 and resulted in having to really to expand the freeway there. So we're looking at a whole number of things as far as where the growth will occur, but it's mainly transportation. It's going to be the driver.
Talking through transportation, what is the role? You mentioned the half-cent sales tax that goes to CCTA, the Contra Costa Transit Authority, and we've had Tim Hale on a previous episode. What is their role in this planning process, and what is the county's role?
So the general plan includes two elements related to this. So there's the transportation element and then the growth management element. And the growth management transportation element is a state mandated element, and the growth management element is mandated through Measure C. Well, Measure J is the operative one now, and then all of the guidance and everything that's been adopted to go with that. So we have been in close contact with CCTA. The general plan, what it includes, of course, there's all the background information and context. There's all kinds of maps and graphics, but the meat and potatoes are goals, policies, and actions. Goals, what we're trying to achieve. Policies, the sort of the statements that guide decision making, and then actions. These are the concrete things we're going to do, like amend the zoning code to achieve some outcome, for example. So when it comes to setting policy, we've been working with CCTA staff. Of course, we have our own transportation planning staff in the county and public works, but then we've also been working with CCTA staff to write these policies and these goals to achieve what we as the collective county are trying to achieve transportation wise over the next couple decades. And then that growth management element actually has to be consistent. CCTA has a model of element, and so we have to be consistent with that, and that helps keep everyone on the same page, kind of all moving, collectively in the right direction.
In the general plan, you talked about it's going to work a lot in unincorporated areas, but you have county resources such as the airport. Buchanan Field is in roughly incorporated areas, but it's under that. How do you account for things like the airports in economic development and working with like Gomentum Station as an example? How do you tie all of that together with this general plan or Or is that not part of the general plan and that's a different thing? And you've got the Northern Waterfront project.
It's all in there in one location or another, not, the Gomentum station. We tend to not use the actual names for a lot of things. Now, of course, Buchanan Field Airport, that is its name. But Gomentum, it's that now. Who knows what things might be called in the future, but the airports are county facilities, county owned and operated facilities, right? So in our economic development section and in the transportation element, we talk about them and their contributions and their importance to the economy of the county. I think there's some feeling that the airports are actually underutilized and are these great economic engines that could do more for us. The Northern Waterfront, there's a map of it in there with the green empowerment zone, with the priority production areas in the county and the unincorporated county. So all these things are discussed, and there's policy language and goals related to all of them. And the county is really has a lot of assets. We have a deep water shipping channel. We've got two major railroad lines going through UP and BNSF, and we've got two airports. And so, all the bones are there, right? For a pretty strong economic engine, not and just our location, right? We're kind of, we're in between Sacramento and San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So there's really a lot that we have going for us in this county economically, or from an economic development perspective, and we've been seeking input from all many different organizations on how to refine and get these economic development policies dialed in.
And so are there specific plans going in for like the airport or that deep water port to do economic development, or is the general plan is the outline for that, and then we're going to roll down into key processes?
Well,
There's
oh, go ahead,
oh,
Maureen.
there's both. They're talked about in the general plan, but as far as for the airport, there's layers of plans that go on that where, the airport staff are working on with the AAA, and then we're working with the airport staff on land uses around the airport, both to move goods and services and to have complementary uses around the airports. And then we have staff that work with the Army Corps of Engineers on the deep water channel. And then with industry, our economic development folks are work with the industrial uses and the other business uses along the northern waterfront. And then also to mention that, as we're trying to grow business along the northern waterfront, we're working on policies to help promote that.
Okay, let's talk about sustainability as an element to the general plan. Will, what are you looking at from you're talking everything in the word sustainability to protecting open space, working with park districts, reducing our energy use, more recycling. I mean, it's a broad topic, but what elements should we look for in the general plan? And what are particularly the goals of the county as it rolls out further?
Well, yeah, the sustainability is just so broad, right? All those things you mentioned factor into it. And kind of going back to your question about where is growth going to happen? Well, we have an urban limit line in this county that the voters put in place back in 1990 and reaffirmed in 2006, and it will be on the ballot again in 2026. And so, we know kind of what the extent of growth is going to be. And that's part of sustainability. About 2/3 of the county is really off limits to urban development. So that's sort of step one. And then within that, it's, renewable energy, it's building efficiency, it is a transportation network that gets people where they want to go efficiently. It's development patterns that allow people to get where they need to go, run their errands, get to their job, and maybe without having to use their car. Zero emission or near zero emission is one of the main pillars of all this, addressing sea level rise. All these topics are addressed in the various elements of the general plan. And of course, habitat conservation. I think a big one that I didn't throw in there.
Tell us about habitat conservation. What are you're trying to save? What do we got here in Contra Costa County that we want to protect?
Well, there's a conservation element of the general plan, and like you say, about roughly 2/3 of the county is off limits um, to urban development. That doesn't mean off limits to development. Of course, there are farms and all kinds of uses outside the urban limit line, watersheds for our big reservoirs, a lot of sensitive habitat. And so, you know, for example, there's policies where we really put concrete rules on wetlands and preserving them. And if you're going to destroy a wetland for development, how much, mitigation there has to be, keeping development away from creeks and other riparian corridors, maintaining our agriculture and our agricultural economy. There are, I think, 500 or so policies in this new general plan. A couple, and the conservation element is one of the biggest elements. I mean, the most content. I think it might actually have the most content, and this is one of the reasons why. I mean, that conservation just it has so many facets that are linked to land use, directly linked to land use, right?
Yeah. And I know in March at Mount Diablo, which I think we each have a picture of in our backgrounds for the YouTube channel, there is an area, I think you get to it through Castle Rock, but which is in East Bay Parks, where there's two families of eagles currently nesting and breeding. And so that whole area is off. And so just to your point, keeping the urban living line, keeping those areas free from development really is essential. So you mentioned the urban limit line and that coming up for a vote. I think you said 2026, so in 2.5 years. Why is that coming up, and who is running that? What is the organization behind?
It's coming up because the last voter initiative, Measure L, in 2006 expires after 20 years. And the organization behind it really is Contra Costa County. All of the cities in the county, so 20 jurisdictions, 19 cities in the county, going back to CCTA and all the model growth management ordinance and all these things that are linked together. All of the 20 jurisdictions in the county are required to have an urban limit line. Um, Back when all this was set up, or at least the current version, I should say, 16 of the 19 cities just adopted the county's line. The county put a line, put it on the ballot. It was approved by the voters. And then when the cities had to have theirs, then 16 of the 19 said, well, we'll just adopt what the county adopted. And then 3 adopted their own. And that's fine. There's a provision to do that. But so to answer the basic question, it's back because that's what the ballot measure said. And it's the county that really kind of takes the lead in adopting it.
That's good. And for our listeners in Solano County, they have an urban limit line, big ballot initiative coming up in November. Theirs was, I believe, last or first adopted at least in 1982, but they are being challenged by the California Forever Group, who would like the new city out there in the Eastern County where they want to develop not all of 60,000 acres, but they own 60,000 acres and they want to change the use from ag use into development. And the current use in Solano County is limited to the 7 cities lines. So it'll be interesting to see there's where that ends up going over the next couple of months and what the recourse is there. But I know that's an urban limit line issue that's very much on a lot of people's minds here in the East Bay, and how it will have a major impact on things.
Right. And our urban limit line really promotes infill development in our existing communities, whether it's in the cities or in the, urbanized, unincorporated areas. It's really that's where the growth should happen and not, at the foothills here, in the photos behind us.
Yeah, is the only what areas of the county are experiencing that total sort of new expansion? It's really just out towards Oakley, Brentwood, and that side of East County. Most of the rest of the county, is it infill?
Most of it is infill. There's some large lots in Discovery Bay. I think there's some pressure down in Camino Tasajera, but other areas in West County, it's all infill. And a lot of our unincorporated areas are bounded by cities, either bounded by cities or bounded by some other geographical feature that, precludes, expansion.
Racial equity is a big piece in this general plan. The county's also recently hired two people to run a DEI department, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Talk about what is going into this plan and how you take a look at it, Will.
This, so as I mentioned, there's a statute, Senate Bill 1000, passed a few years back, that required jurisdictions to address environmental justice in their general plan. And so it's one of the major themes of this plan. The very first element is a new one we created called the Stronger Communities element, and that's really where sort of the four themes I mentioned earlier, that's kind of home base for them. Now there's, parts of the other elements that where transportation or sustainability and all these other topics appropriately go, and environmental justice. But so the Stronger Communities element, we made it the first element because we wanted to highlight it, and environmental justice is kind of subject number one. And really, in a nutshell, planning does not have a very good history. In the last century, it's really been used as a tool for discrimination in so many instances. I mean, institutional racism, it's kind of the definition in a lot of ways. Not inherently, but because the way it's been implemented. And so in the county, Maureen mentioned it earlier, they're called disadvantaged communities in the statute. Nobody really likes that term, so we call them impacted communities in the general plan. And they're really these communities that over time have suffered because of, I mean, any number of factors, but their adjacency to, heavy industry that's polluting, redlining, discriminatory lending practices, all of these things, that were so prevalent really in the 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way really, I mean, into the 60s. We have the Civil Rights Act, and it becomes law really that you can't do this, but that doesn't mean those things stopped then. So for any number of factors, these are communities that really just have suffered from pollution, have not had the economic opportunity and advantages of other communities in the county. And so environmental justice is really about reversing all of this, everything that's happened to these communities over the last century or so.
Maureen, anything to add there?
No, I think that's correct. We have some policies that are gonna have us take a careful look at whatever kind of land uses are proposed in these communities. It's all about helping these communities, have the things they need to have, like grocery stores, like walkable communities, and less of the things that, impact somebody's health.
Staying on that subject, and then I'll ask more broadly, if you look forward to the plan results in past passage, when you look back in 10 or 20 years to sort of view, hey, we were successful, we did lay the framework in this related to that equity, what would you see as a success? How would you look back and say, yes, we achieved our goal?
I would say having a community where, the residents feel comfortable, safe, walking in their community because they have sidewalks, they have good lighting, they have places to walk to, parks, retail, grocery stores, schools nearby. I think that's the one thing, or, probably the highlighted thing would be a mix of uses that, increase the quality of life for a community.
I would add to that also
Yeah.
that people were, included in the processes, because that's really part of the reason that all this happened, is that people were barred from being part of the decisions. And, it's just to be honest, it's a lot harder if you're working two jobs and you're struggling to make ends meet. Your priority when you come home at night probably is not going to a planning commission meeting to talk about what is happening down the street, or nearby in your community that's going to affect you. And some people do have the privilege of doing that. And so a lot of there's a section in the Stronger Communities element that is dedicated to community engagement, and It's, getting out in the community, talking to people who have traditionally not had a voice in these decisions, getting things out, in more languages, having maybe different meeting times instead of, where people might be more able to attend. So in addition to all the things Maureen said that are kind of the physical changes or manifestations of all this, I think also where the community members were part of it all and feel heard, and their voices are actually reflected, and what happened, how development proceeded actually reflects what people there had to say.
Well, do you wanna mention the number of, community meetings that we've held through this process?
Well, the running tally, it's somewhere over 140 total meetings now, that we count. And so we have them in different kind of buckets. But when we talk about actual community meetings, open houses, things like that, it it's over 50 of those. And we weighted them more toward those impacted communities. We've had more meetings in North Richmond and Bay Point, for example, than some other communities. And because we knew that it was going to there would have to be more opportunities there, and to go face to face with people and speak with them, and see, what was happening. But we've met with, I want to say around 30 different, or made presentations to around 30 different community organizations now. And I shouldn't even say community organizations. Some of it ranges from the Western States Petroleum Association down to local historic societies, and everyone in between. And then of course there's all the formal meetings of the Board of Supervisors Planning Commission, Sustainability Commission, that the county, that's part of county government, where people have had the opportunity to come and speak.
Yeah, and I would just add that, during the pandemic, that really threw us a curveball as far as how we're gonna continue to have these community meetings, but, we found one of our most successful meetings was a Zoom meeting that we had with the community of Canyon. And I think it's been a very, very long time till since we've been able to engage the residents of that community, and it was a really memorable meeting that we had because of the participation that we had where people did not have to, arrange for childcare and come to, that central location. Everybody we met everyone in their homes. And that was a real benefit that we've been able to do that as well.
Yeah, I understand. I'm a father of three girls currently between 4 and 9. And I'm the current chair of the CCTA Citizen Advisory Committee. And we meet on a Wednesday night from 6 to 8, 8:30, depending on how many questions people ask. And we only went back in January for the first time in person. And it's made bedtime just a lot harder at home. It's a night where I'm just now not home instead of I could fully participate on the Zoom, and it was just harder. And I live 15 minutes away. I'm not the one coming in from East County or West County where it's a lot harder to get to. And that changes who could serve on these committees, how you participate in public hearings. Unfortunately, a lot of cities have gone away with Zoom participation due to, let's just call them circumstances on it. We have that, I think, on episode 7 if people want to listen to more of those. But I get that it's not easy to engage people of all different walks of life at different times of day and everything. So I appreciate how hard that is. If people want to comment on this and get engaged before it's too late, how do they participate in that process?
Well, first of all, we do have all of our documents and reviews of all of the meetings that we've had thus far on a website called envisioncontracosta2040.org. There's a whole history of this entire process. I would suggest that people go to that website and take a look. We have some documents that are recaps, just a summary of what the proposal is. And then we'll be taking public comment on the adequacy of the environmental impact report and the general plan itself and the climate action plan, which is coming along at the same time. We're going to be taking those comments until April 8th. People can make comments online on the website. They can write us. They can email us. What else, Will?
Yeah, there's going to be a webinar on the 26th of March. And then the website is it's the real resource. As Maureen mentioned, we can be emailed through there, but the documents themselves, the general plan and the climate action plan, there are versions, there's an online tool that you can use to put your comments actually directly into the documents. And then we're going to get all those. So you could go to page 212 and, say, I think this policy right here should say this instead, or this isn't correct on this map. Or so it's really accessible uh, in that way.
That's kind of cool if you could insert it right in, and instead of you as staff reading it in all these different contexts as people give feedback, it's right there and you know where it is and it's searchable for both you and the commenter. And we'll put the link to the plan update and Envision Contra Costa into the show notes for everybody. What else should we be asking? What else do you want to tell people as you go through this process?
Well, I think basically is that this document is a culmination of all of the public input that we've heard so far. So, public input is important. We're listening right now. We have some very interesting profiles that we didn't have in the previous general plan, and that's a community profile for each of the unincorporated communities that were really basically drafted as a result of our community meetings. We really tried to customize the document as much as possible for these communities.
Yeah, I would add, on the front page of the website, it says, "What should Contra Costa County be like when our kids grow up? Let's plan for the future together." And I think part of the take home is think about exactly that. I mean, what should this place be like 10 or 20 years from now? When your 10-year-old is your 30-year-old, should there be a place for them to live? Should there be a place for them to work? Should your grandkids have parks that are accessible to them? And so, it's very easy to just read the general plan and think of it in terms of 2024, but it's really the plan for the next 2 decades. And so getting out of the tendency to think about now and think about the future is, I think, a lot of what I think it's something, just an idea I would like to put out there, but that I think people don't typically think about when they're thinking about planning.
I think that was a great way to vision it, right? What is your life? What are your kids, your friends? Where does everybody look like and where will they be in 20 years? And close your eyes and do that. And I think that's a good, powerful image. Before we head out, go through the process again. So April 8th, you're finishing public comments. What's the approval process to getting this adopted?
Sure. We need to respond to all of the comments that people give us on the DIR. And then our responses to those comments will be accumulated into the final EIR responses to comments. That whole package, the general plan, the draft EIR, and the final EIR will then go to the Planning Commission for their consideration. And then once they make a recommendation, that will go to the Board of Supervisors for their consideration and adoption. Basically, we've had a number of meetings. We're trying to wrap those up during the public comment period so that that might help some groups, individuals frame their comments, if they have a better understanding of what the document actually entails. So April 8th is when we're accepting comments until, and then it's going to take us a good 6, 8 weeks or so until we have a final EIR out and ready to go to the next step, which is the Planning Commission. And I would also note that we're also considering the Climate Action Plan. That's some other folks from the Department of Conservation and Development that are driving that process as well. And they have a number of meeting forums that they are attending and, that the public is welcome to attend as well.
That is helpful information. I think this has been fascinating to learn really like what goes into this. Will spend more than 5 years of his life living and breathing this document and putting it together and taking input from the public, which is not necessarily easy to do. So it will be interesting to see where you go, what your next project is after this. I appreciate Will Nelson and Maureen Tom. Thanks for sharing with us, and maybe we'll have you on in a couple months once this is implemented to talk about the changes that are starting to take place in the county.
Well, thank you, Jared. We're happy to join you.
Yeah, thank you, Jared.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Ash, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.